Hi, welcome to Cole and Ian's Fishing Show. Today we're going to talk about some of our favorite spring lures to use. So Ian, you start.
Yeah. So water's cold. I mean, they're not going to be out deep yet. So I just like to use the Berkeley Chopo. I mean, it's big. It's like the Whopper Plopper, just a little bit bigger, and it doesn't have that tail spin like the Whopper Plopper does.
I agree. Also, they're going to be hungry, so where is it? You want to use a crankbait, mainly a crawfish style or a bluegill style, depending what they're feeding on. And also, when it moves later in the season, when they're going to be starting to spawn, they're going to be eating a lot. So you throw like a lot of soft plastics. You can throw some swim baits. You can throw some Texas rigs, depending on like creature style or whatever.
I like to throw just some shaky heads out there with a little bit longer worm instead of a short worm.
I also like to throw, let's see. Got a square bill, which is like a perch color, slightly, maybe just a bit bluegill. All bass love it, especially the big ones. You can throw it shallow up against structure almost anywhere.
The crankbaits are good because when the water's cold, it's what you want to throw as a crankbait because they're going to be hard baits. They're going to be looking for shad. They're going to just be looking for something to eat because they're just coming out of a winter.
Agreed. Also, now that's for like in the beginning of the spring season, so like it just turned from being iced over to like open water, so it's gonna be relatively cold. So they're gonna be wanting a lot of slow baits too, so from like jig heads and stuff.
Like throwing just straight up just green pumpkin Senkos with or without a weight on top.
Yeah, you know. Also, favorite jig to throw is the Mustad Mystery Jig. You could use any type of trailer for it. It's a great bass lure too. It could be used when they're spawning, post-spawning, pre-spawning, anything. They'll most likely bite it, so that's why it's one of the best to use.
I like throwing these little lifted jigs with just a little Kitech swim bait on the back. With the paddle tail, it gives it that more of a shad-looking fall when it goes and drops down in the water.
Now this is what we like to use. You may like to use stuff different because lakes do vary on what they have. Like the lake I fish at has a lot of crawfish and stuff. And for the lake he fishes at, it may not have as many crawfish and may have more minnows and shad. So that also plays a big factor in what to throw and like how to use.
The bass are going to feed on different type of things, so you
Yes.
never really know with what lake you go to.
Yes, and it could depend on the depth too. So I know minnows don't have that great of swim bladders, so they're not going to be, you know, like 50 feet deep for certain lakes. And then it also depends like what variant of bass you're fishing for. You know, smallmouth really like tubes, and largemouth, you know, they like a lot worms, soft plastic Senkos and stuff like that. So it also varies on what kind of fish. And when you're throwing the largemouth bass lures, it can also vary from species what will hit. You could have northern pike to walleye to muskie. So it's like a very versatile lure that you're using. So like you can say you're going to catch largemouth and you try, but you may end up catching something different. So that's also a pro of it. Now what about late spring? It's about to turn to summer. The temperatures are becoming fairly warm and fairly consistent. What would you throw them?
For largemouth?
Yes, for largemouth.
If the water's cold, probably a crankbait. If not, I'll throw a shaky head or like a Ned rig or a drop shot type of bait.
And what is your ounce for the shaky heads?
Just this little 3/8 ounce shaky head hook.
Now, will that vary from depth?
Yeah, depth and if there's weeds, so a little bit heavier of a weight to drop through the weeds.
Fishing by docks, what are you using? I would use a crankbait. What would you use?
Probably a Texas rig bandito bug.
Oh, yes, yes. And then, so my favorite soft plastic, we're gonna hop back to post-spawn, or pre-spawn, my bad. Pre-spawn or when they're spawning, because they tend during spawn they tend not to eat. They tend to worry more about keeping fish and other creatures off from their beds. So the best way to catch fish, mainly bass, when they're on their spawn bed is to have a soft plastic, mainly looking like a crayfish or a creature bait.
You want it to be subtle.
Yeah, you
Not
want it
a lot
to be
of
subtle.
movement.
You want it to look like it's pecking at the eggs. Now the bass are going to get aggravated and they're not going to bite, or they're not going to fully commit the first couple of times. But after tension builds, they'll fully commit to a bite, which is good, so you'll catch one. Mainly, I like to use the Berkeley power baits for that. It's called Pit Boss. I use the watermelon color, also a green pumpkin. They could be very similar at times.
I like using these green pumpkin little swim baits by Bridgemaster down in Florida. They're good for bed fishing or just out in the middle of Lake St. Clair.
Yeah, that's also a good thing, is the soft plastics can be used for more than just bed fishing. They can be used for almost anything, you know. Now, let's talk about structure-wise. So if there's a down tree with some rocks by it, what are you gonna throw?
Bandito bug, crack and craw, or just a straight up
Shaky.
Senko like this.
So you keep on going back. Is Senko one of your favorite? Because I recall a couple of times now you've called out the Senko, saying that
Senkos, Bandito bugs, Ned rigs,
What
they all
about-
work pretty good for when I'm fishing.
What do you think of chatterbaits then? Do you think that would work for the structure?
Last year didn't have much luck on chatterbaits, but the year before that, fish were hitting them pretty good. So I mean, it's kind of hit or miss with using chatterbaits.
What color would you use? Does that depend on the temperature?
Black and blue, or just a little chartreuse and white.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. We'll see you guys next week on Cole and Ian's Fishing Show. Hopefully, the ice will be frozen over so we could go do some ice fishing. But if not, we'll be back to talk about summer baits and what's our favorite. So thank you for watching, and tune in next week.